What has this week meant for you, seeing images from Afghanistan of the regime you helped prop up collapsing in double time?
It's been a really, really difficult week for me personally, and that has been almost exacerbated by hearing from the soldiers who served alongside me, and from seeing colleagues who, at some point served, and seeing and hearing their outpourings of disappointment, frustration, grief, anger, hurt. It's difficult to take on board, and it's difficult to process, to be honest.
Nick, one of the things that strikes me is just how that tension must exist between people who've been out there seeing life run by a different set of rules, and then to come back to the relative orderliness rather than chaos of Britain. And that tension between these two worlds, it must be very hard for people who've served out there who come back to Civvy Street to reconcile sometimes.
Absolutely. Transition from military back into society is difficult anyway. Once you've done such deployments, we know there's a big problem. The suicide rates amongst veterans are pretty drastic. We're almost at the point where there's been same number of suicides as what there were deaths during Afghan alone. So it is difficult, and times like this really reopen wounds almost for many people, not just veterans and military personnel, but also the partners and families, and widowers that end up having to relive it all over again. So you do and end up with that question as to what was it all for, and was it worth it?
Johnny, is it posing questions for you this week?
You can probably see my face. I'm absolutely knackered. It's been an exhausting week. It has posed a lot of questions which I don't really know the answers for at the moment. I'm trying to work those out. By talking to my friends, by keeping talking has been critical for me. So the phone has been red hot, my battery's been permanently low, physically and on my phone. But it has raised lots of questions. I'm starting to reconcile with that, and I'm sure we'll get to the answer.
Is the key question, was it worth it? What on earth did we do there?
It is, that's the common one. I still think it's worth it. Certainly if I look at my own child, as I have been intently this week, and thinking about what I did, was it worth it for her and her security? And for those children that I worked with in the school in Afghanistan, Sidhan school, and the uncertainty around that school has been playing on my mind and those children. But with those fears comes some hope. And that was 10 years ago. So many of those children are now adults who might have their own families or starting their own families, and their expectation of education is different from their parents, as it was for me. The question of going to university wasn't in the conversation around the kitchen table for me, but I did, because I was pointed there by a teacher. So I'm hoping that those teachers that I work with inside Sidhan school and those children, their expectation about their future and their children's future will be different. So for me, that makes it worth it.
Yeah. Nick, when you see pictures, as we've seen this week, of American but British soldiers as well at the airport being handed children, trying to create some order from the chaos, what runs through your mind?
Initially, beginning of this week, I actually tried to stay away from it. For my own mental health, I'm still dealing with PTSD and depression, and I've been in quite a dark place anyway before this happened. And unfortunately, when I did actually have a look what was going on, where we're at, it was the video, I think it was yesterday, of the United States Air Force plane taxiing down the runway. And, when you're so desperate to escape that you cling to the outside of a moving plane, it's heart-wrenching, it's absolutely gut-wrenching. And again, I've got a daughter, she's only 14, and I think there was a picture of a military personnel carrying a child. That for me was just, really difficult, like you say. But I do firmly believe that we have to take solace in the fact that, like Johnny says, 2 decades we were there, a whole new generation of Afghani people have enjoyed a better life, more security, the infrastructure we put in place, the schools, the education, more women from Afghani have been speaking on the international circuit, and they've experienced a much better way of life compared to their parents and grandparents. So for me, I'm clinging to that. And although there's a very emotional side, I believe that we have to cling to that hope.
James, there's a sort of unspoken truth, it seems to me, that sometimes comes through from talking to people, talking to veterans, which is that the times they spent in theatre were the most intense and rewarding of their lives. And it's almost an embarrassing secret that people are reluctant to share. But do you know what I mean?
I wouldn't be reluctant to share that at all, no. And I would say, apart from proposing to my fiancée, I would say that my times in theatre were the most intense, emotionally engaging, exciting, rewarding, horrific of my life. And they
to the point, James, where people miss it, I mean.
So one of the things that I've been contemplating is, in the conversations that I've been having with friends of mine who are upset and friends of mine who are letting it go this last week, is if I said, should we go back? Every single one would say yes.
Really?
And that is no comfort or solace to the widows and widowers and children who lost parents. And you know, that I can't imagine how they're feeling. But there is a whole generation of young men and women, and now older men and women who served their country. And they will forever be proud of that and what they did every moment, every day, anything that they did, they should be proud of, and that does make it.
And that cohort of veterans is working its way through society now. They went there in their 20s, they're now in their 40s, and you see it in some of our political figures and figures even in business, for instance. How are they different from people who didn't serve? What sets them apart, if anything?
So, you know, I don't want to speak for everyone here, but, you know, I've spoken with, and I'm very close to, a number of veterans who work in politics as MPs and who run businesses or who are successful in large companies, you know, Deloitte, KPMG. And I would say that you don't have to have served to have core values and to be a good leader, but it is excellent training. It is a great setup for individuals who need to show integrity, who have shown moral and physical courage, you know, who do put others first. All of these things that kind of contribute, you know, I'm not going to list the 6 core values of the army, but you know, you can see those elements in servicemen and servicewomen and veterans. And I think it's something that we really should be looking for more in every point in our lives, you know, every point of society.
Was there something in particular about the nature of IEDs, of those improvised explosive devices, that must have meant that every minute of every hour of every day when you were patrolling, you knew it could be your last breath?
Yes. Yes, there was.
Nick?
Yeah, the real scary one came from me actually just before that in Iraq, and when they went into PIR, passive infrared, and you knew that, you know, your electronic countermeasures weren't as effective against that. And when they took that from Iraq into Afghan, you know, whilst...
So they devised new, better ways of killing you?
Absolutely. We couldn't block it because it's set. And as soon as you cross that beam, like anything you got in your bathroom, when you walk in and the light comes on, that technology was hooked up to IEDs. Whilst I didn't deploy out of Bastion, because I was there as a training team, I was all too aware of how devastating that can be and how ineffective we are, aside from obviously the vehicles that we had, and finally got the decent vehicles that could protect us.
And Johnny, talking about Bastion, I mean, some of the wounds and injuries that were caused by IEDs that people survived, absolutely extraordinary. Reflect on that if you would briefly, but also that sense of every day, because of the IED threat, the stress levels, the anxiety levels. You know, it's one thing to, in the trenches of World War I, to go over the top, but this must have been, on a long patrol, you were over the top all the time for hours on end.
Yeah, it's sort of omnipresent really, and we had the sad reality of the impact of that the day that we lost Private Matt Thornton, who was our single death from our call sign in particular, and that was as a result of an IED and a complex attack. So the reality, that was pretty early on in our tour.
What do you mean by complex attack?
So where you involve IEDs rifle, small arms fire as well.
So they've blown up and killed one of your men, and then they start shooting at you as well?
Yeah. So that reality was dawned pretty early on us, as I was attached to the 1st Battalion in the Yorkshire Regiment. And then soon after that, I lost a friend, squadron leader, Ant Downing, in a IED in Kabul. As a interpreter cohort or linguist cohort, we were all over the country, so we weren't able to grieve together at that moment. So the reality dawned us pretty early on in the tour. That was really early on in the tour. So therefore, from that moment on, it was a reality that dawned upon me that I then had with me all the time, whenever I stepped out on the ground. But then the responsibility to your mates, that you stepping on an IED could cause more hassle for them, not only harm for yourself, but the knock-on effects on that as well. So therefore, you really had to switch on and do your drills as trained, as taught, in order to secure the safety of your friends too. So it did have an impact upon me, and as I think about it now, it's quite remarkable that anxiety probably is part of me now.
Colin, do you mind if I
Please do.
go on?
Yeah.
So on my tour, when we're talking about IEDs, we had a contact IED on foot. So myself and 2 other my soldiers were blown up on foot. Thankfully, no one with serious physical injuries. The vehicles, I think, were hit 2 or 3 times. A minibus, which had 4 generations of the same family on it, was blown up, and that was a civilian, was blown up.
What happened to them?
They all died. Every single person on the minibus was blown to smithereens. And then very, very shortly before the end of the tour, a good friend of mine, Captain Rupert Bowers, was blown up nearby in RAO. The takeaway that I have is that it was an absolutely horrific method of fighting, and it had a huge impact on the psychology of all of our soldiers. But huge credit has to go out to the Valen guys, the people with the equipment who could try and search for mines or IEDs. Absolutely, that's right. So the soldiers who were at the front of the patrol, and then also, if we're being really honest, our Afghan partners, they didn't have that kit and equipment, and they took their lives in their own hands even more every day, and at times, if they were feeling brave and they pushed on ahead, then we could follow them, and we'll always be grateful to them for that. But it was a horrific weapon to be used against us. Really, really difficult to fight.
Guys, it's been such a privilege talking to you today, and I know you get thanked for what you did out there, but for everybody for whom the streets of the UK were kept that little bit safer, at least for a few years, we need to remember the sacrifices that all you guys gave, and some of the people who didn't come back as well that we remember. I just want to conclude with one final and very brief thought from all of you. We've talked about what happened. It's beginning to fade into memory, more so for people who didn't serve than those who did now. But in a one-word answer, I want you to tell me whether you think, perhaps because Afghanistan becomes a playground for terrorism again, or for other reasons, British soldiers will again serve in Afghanistan within the next few years or decades. James?
I don't know, probably.
Nick?
I'd like to think not, but I think something will have to happen.
Johnny?
There's a realistic possibility.
Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, Colin.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.